Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Mike Neither Music channel. So I'm gonna start a new series today talking about music philosophy, because obviously there's a million videos on, different exercises and that kind of stuff, and I'll still do those videos. But where I think there's an open landscape is talking about the mindset, and specifically today talking about improvisation. So you've learned some scales, and it comes to your turn to improvise, and you don't sound like David Gilmour or John Mayer or Santana. Where's the gap? I've had so many students get to this point and just get super frustrated, and I was there myself at one point too. Music is a language. Learning notes and learning scales are like learning the alphabet and learning words. I mean, think of how long it took us as babies, as children, to learn English. At first it starts out and we just can kind of mimic sounds that we hear, and then we start to develop a little bit more faculty, and then we can kind of start saying some words, and eventually we can start saying phrases. Music is the exact same way. This whole thing is a process. Learning scales and learning notes are like learning words. And you might find words that you like more than other words. You might find scales or intervals within the scales that you like more than others, and that's how you start to develop your own taste. The biggest thing that I think people lack is recognizing that once you know the scales aren't the answer. Scales teach us how notes fit together, and that's great. And they teach you where they are on the fretboard, and that's great. However, learning scales doesn't make you great at soloing. And I guess what really lacks at that point is creativity and intention and saying something with your solo, rather than just, look, I found these notes that kind of belong over these chords. And that's what a lot of people think that it is. I've had so many students over the years get frustrated right at this point. So how do you move past it? First, you got to start thinking about, what are you listening to? As I was really developing as a guitarist, I was obsessed with Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. Now, with Joe Satriani, I was obsessed with his music. He's like the Jimi Hendrix of the 80s. He took the essence of Jimi Hendrix and brought it to the next level. That's how I see him. And if you listen to him, you hear Hendrix influence all over the place. Steve Vai, on the other hand, is very unique, and he sounds like himself, and I love that. Both of them have amazing interviews where they talk about their musical process, where they talk about how they write music, where they talk about how they view music. And I mean, we're talking 10 years ago now, but I, at that point, had probably watched every single interview that either of those guys had ever put online to that point, because it really fascinated me. And it's not just the notes that they play, it's the intention behind the notes. So Joe Satriani had a contest where someone won a free lesson from him, and they filmed it and put it on YouTube. So of course I watched the crap out of it. But one of the things that he talks about is, especially as instrumentalists, we don't have words to paint our pictures. All we have is our notes. So how do we differentiate a song Red Velvet from Blue Burlap? It comes down to how we play the notes. How we play the notes. So this is something I was stressing to one of my students just the other day. You're not going to find the note H. Like, there's only A through G. You're not going to find a note that no one else has ever played. So it comes down to how you play the notes. And how you play the notes is vastly more important than what notes you play, in my opinion. And I think this is where the growth comes from after you learn the scales. Once you learn some scales, go back and listen to how the people that you really appreciate use them. So something I used to do back in the day was I would improvise over, like I'd put on a Joe Satriani record, and I'd improvise over what he was playing, but I wouldn't try to play the exact same note or phrase that he played, but I would try to catch the cadence. I would try to mirror the rhythm of what he played, playing notes that I was playing notes that I picked that weren't necessarily what, and sometimes I would try to catch a lick and I'd find it and be like, oh, that's sweet. And that's important too. The more that you can figure out how they do different licks and stuff will help you. Focusing on the cadence and the rhythm is how you can kind of sound like yourself while still approaching it in a way that sounds musical and interesting, because that's how a musical genius has done it. So this whole thing is a little esoteric, but I kind of like this realm of where music meets philosophy. So to sum up, basically, if you've learned scales and you don't feel like your solos are interesting, number one, that's just a stage. The more that you practice, the better it'll be. Two, focus on not just the right notes, but how to play the right notes and when to play the right notes. And listen to the people that you really love and appreciate and see how they did it, and then try to incorporate that. And lastly, try to capture the rhythms of how your heroes play without necessarily worrying so much about the notes. You'll see your solos start to really improve. The other big thing that I think needs to be mentioned is that you gotta practice improvising if you wanna be good at it. You can't just practice scales for 30 minutes a day and then show up at a blues jam and expect magic to come out. Like for me, more than anything else that I've practiced on a guitar, by a factor of like 50, is improvisation. It's my favorite thing to do, it's what I love doing the most, and it's what I've spent the most time doing. Try to work on improvisation and not just thinking about it as scales and this note belongs and this note doesn't belong, but think of it as trying to tell a story. Okay, so one last little tip, another interesting thing to try is imagine a scene in your head and try to paint it on the guitar. Try to describe it with the guitar. And I know we're getting into some esoteric kind of undefinable territory here, but that's where the magic is with this kind of stuff. Like when I was in college, I was always the guy at parties with the acoustic guitar. I always found it extremely rewarding if someone was telling a story and there's a bunch of people in the room and they're talking, I would always try to underline what they were talking about with my guitar, and I would try to subtly enhance the story and pull people in and affect them without them really even realizing it. And I was pretty good at it, to be honest. And it was something that I really enjoyed doing. But I think it really got me thinking about, like, okay, you're angry and you're lost. How would I describe that on a guitar? Or you're standing on the altar and the person you're supposed to marry has just bailed on you. How would that sound on a guitar? Just like stuff like that. So, moral of the story is, if you want to take better solos, stop thinking about them as, I know these notes belong, look how good I am at my scales, and start thinking about telling a story and finding ways to connect with people with what you play. And again, the ways to grow from scales to that are listening to people that you appreciate, dissecting what they do, both rhythmically and melodically, and trying to do it yourself, and then working on improvising as a skill by itself. So, I hope this video helped you. If you got any more tips along these lines, put them down in the comments. But yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.